This happened to me a while ago when I was scuba diving off the coast of Washington. Now, normally, scuba diving in these waters aren't very preferable because the visibility is quite low and the waters are absolutely freezing. Nevertheless, there are some amazing fish that you can see in these areas that are pretty unique to that part of the world. Anyways, I had just jumped into the water and was beginning my descent when all of a sudden my buddy and I saw this black mass below us. Now, normally, when you look down when you're scuba diving, everything is black, especially in these waters, but this figure was blacker than black. Now, there are giant Pacific octopi and sharks and everything else that had a high likelihood of being underneath us at that very moment, but this shape was massive, and I'm talking whale massive. Now, in the area that we were scuba diving, it wasn't very far down, probably about 30 meters, and whales of that scale do not like to venture in those kind of shallow waters. So we chalked it up to maybe some kelp or algae. Little did we know that that was not the case. We were descending on this shipwreck to kind of scavenge around and maybe see some cool aquatic life. We get down there and begin to look around. It was at that moment that the water suddenly became ice cold. And normally the water in that area is pretty cold as is, but this was like Arctic cold. I've dived in the Arctic before, and that water just bites you. This was that kind of cold. Slightly freaked out now, we began to look around to see if maybe a current had come in. We looked up and we saw the exact same black mass that we'd seen before. Only the mass began to make its way towards us. With eyes wide and hearts beating, we held our ground. There was nowhere we could go. If we just swam off in random directions, there would be no way to even find each other again, let alone find the surface safely. So we held our ground, and this thing came closer. Then it hit us. This mass was a bunch of smaller things, but it was just conglomerated together. As the things came closer, it was realized that these things were eels. And I've seen a lot of eels in my time scuba diving, but these were just some other species. They had long heads and very streamlined bodies, like your average eel, but jet black. Their eyes were white, like milky white, almost if they were blind. Their mouths were small, but upon closer inspection, when they would open them, they would open as wide as maybe 2 or 3 feet. Now, that wouldn't be alarming, but each of these things were about 4 feet long, so opening its mouth to 2 to 3 feet, that's unheard of in the animal kingdom, even amongst the most largest of snakes. We began to pray at this point, or at least I was, and we just held on for dear life. This swarm of eels just passed us. They came into pretty close proximity to us, but I don't think they even knew that we were there. So they passed us, and after collectively pooping ourselves, we made an emergency ascent. Upon resurfacing, we flagged down our boat and got the hell out of there as fast as possible. To this day, I haven't seen any aquatic life like that in any sort of books or in any records ever. It might have been a new species, but I've never heard of such eels traveling in packs like that, swarms even. There are hundreds of them. The ocean is one mysterious place, and the only place on Earth that gives me actual, legitimate fear. So I can get in a lot of trouble for telling this story. I've worked at an oil refinery for about 20 years now, and about 2 to 3 years ago, there was an incident that made headlines but was quickly pulled and swept under the rug. What basically happened was that we found a living organism in one of the oil tar pits, basically all the runoff and byproducts from oil that get put in this big pit for further processing. Now, these pits are extraordinarily toxic, and nothing can survive in there. I know that for sure. As much as a splash of this black liquid on your skin is enough to give you a severe chemical burn. So I was on my shift, just minding my own business, hard at work, when one of the younger guys ran up and was pretty hysterical towards me. Now, normally, a bunch of guys working in an enclosed environment tend to pull a lot of practical jokes on each other, so I thought that this was no exception. He kept screaming at me that he saw something in the pits, that there was something alive and it was moving and thrashing around, I swear. Now, I thought he was just pulling my leg, as anyone would, but I decided to humor the youngster. So I walked over with him, and he quickly pointed out this thing that was very much thrashing around in the pits. I immediately went into code red because situations like this, there's more likely than not a person who's fallen in. A bunch of people swarm the area. Rescue teams and superiors and all the other workers. The police are called, the fire department is called. And now, before anyone arrives, like any emergency workers or anything, I get back there and I'm looking down into the pit. It is then that I realize that this thing is only about 2 feet long, but with multiple, and I mean multiple, appendages. Not even like an octopus, but more like a jellyfish. I mean, this thing had hundreds of little tentacles coming off of it. It was very odd. Another thing that I noticed was that this thing kept on submerging itself under the black tar. Also, throughout the pit, we began to notice that all these streams of bubbles kept coming up, as much as bubbles can make their way through extremely viscous tar. And, all at once, there began to emerge all these different kinds of creatures with the exact same appendages and exact same appearances. It was very freaky, to say the least. After the emergency vehicles showed up, our superiors immediately told us to go home for the day and that they would handle the situation. Later that night, in fact, they told us not to come back to work until the situation was handled, which would probably be a few weeks. Now, during this time that I wasn't working, I managed to drive by the place a few times, and every time I did, there were white tents pitched up everywhere, and black vehicles, and people that were dressed up in what appeared to be extraordinarily heavy hazmat suits. It was also around this time that, hanging around my coworkers for barbecues and beers or whatever, there began to emerge conspiracies about what was happening, whispers about what these things actually were. It ultimately amounted to nothing and we got back to work, but the day that we did, word got out that living organisms were found to be thriving in the pits. Now, we were told strictly never to tell anyone about this, and I partially blame them for telling us and then expecting us not to go public with this, but most people, out of fear for losing their jobs, kept silent. I have since been retired, so I fear no retribution from them, but I don't know, it still kind of creeps me out if the government was involved in this, or maybe me telling this story to you guys will get me in some sort of trouble. I'm not sure. But I know for sure what I saw that day, and hearing that these were living organisms from my superiors further instills that. It might have been alien or something else, I'm not sure, but it nevertheless makes me wonder about our place in the universe. So I've worked as a search and rescue operative for many, many years. I've actually left this pretty popular thread on Reddit if any of you are interested. It goes into depth about search and rescue stories and the kind of stuff I've seen and my people have seen as well. Anyways, this is a separate story that just recently happened during one particular search and rescue operation. Now, there's this one place in the park that has had a lot of activity throughout the years and is pretty famous throughout our group, and as well as the public at large. There's been this one famous sighting that most people like to call the man who snaps, and it's basically this hiker that people see from a distance snap in half at the hip and fall off the mountain. Now, hearing about this legend in stories is one thing, but seeing it for myself is another completely. So I was searching the squadron with the guy I was with, along with his search dog, when all of a sudden we see this guy in the distance who has a red coat on and jeans and a big backpack and what seems to be a baller cap. So we find this is very strange, given the fact that the park has been closed down to give us ample time and space to search the area for the missing person. So, out of routine, we try to holler at him and get his attention for him to come on down and talk to us. After a few minutes of trying to get this guy's attention, we decide to make our way towards him. He's standing at an elevated position, just looking over the vast wilderness that's below us. We were on top of a pretty big hill at the time. We get about 50 yards away from him when the guy turns around. And I swear to God, this guy has a perpetual smile on his face. I'm not normally creeped out by smiles at all. It's a manifestation of human joy, and I actually quite like it. But this guy's smile was just wrong. Forced, even. And even at that distance, it was very disturbing. So after this guy turns around, my buddy's canine absolutely goes ballistic. I had no idea that dogs could do this, but this dog began to scream at this guy. Not even barking, but just screaming, and his tail was between his legs, so I assume it was out of fear. Now, the reaction from the dog made us both stop dead in our tracks. Before we could say anything or do anything, the guy snapped in half at the hip and fell backwards off the hill. After a few minutes of trying to grasp reality, my buddy and I run over to the ledge and look over. The guy's nowhere to be seen, even though we saw him with our eyes, and our dog was going crazy because of him. He was nowhere. Like so many times before, we never found the missing person we were after, and the image of this guy has been burned in my brain ever since then. I'll try talking to some other people and see if I can get some stories out of them pertaining to this exact individual and this exact legend. There's a lot of forces that we don't know about out here. Hey guys, it's Gote here. Thank you so much for listening to this video. Cryptid stories are a big passion as well of mine. I love telling them, I love reading them. It's just an amazing topic, and I really do believe that people have this innate interest for that which is unknown. So if any of you have any stories of your own that you would like for me to share on this channel, go ahead and send them to me via my personal email linked in the description below, and I'll be sure to include them in a future video. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do that. It is free, and it really helps me out. Also, if you want to donate to me via my PayPal, linked on my channel, I really want to get a new microphone, but finances have been pretty tough, so any dollar counts. I'm not asking you guys for anything. I'm just saying if you want to donate to this channel out of the kindness of your heart, it will be much appreciated, and I will be forever in your gratitude. So with all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you mates in the next episode.